Good morning. We continue the review of the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. We're on page 1416. And discussing essentially, in the bigger picture, the interface and the joining of the divine Malakal Almin, which permeates existence, as the divine that relates to existence, the divine, and uniting that together with the Hamshacha from Sevav Kalalmin, the divine that's beyond existence, and it all leads up to the third level, which ultimately joins the two, though he hasn't been emphasizing that so much, but it's pretty clear from the whole picture, and that's what he calls Atzmus Ein Sof, Lifnei Atzimtzum, all the way in the highest root, that's Shmoi Ha'atzmi, Helam Ha'atzmi, that where Neshamas are ultimately rooted. However, Neshamas come down below, so they can't just access that without siyua, like an eye that needs an outside light, which is Teira Eir and Einei Ha'eda, and the Sanhedrin, the teachers, and the Malachim. And then there is how that comes down after the Tzimtzum, meaning in so-called the cosmic order, that's the level of Atik, or Primus Atik. Hatoka, the Tachteina Shebemaitzil, which again is rooted in the Mechinas Achreina Sheba'atzmos that he called earlier. So that is the highest level. But then comes the lower level of Makif, which is Arich, generally speaking. There's Atik Arich, which is already rational at Solom. It's already relating to existence, even though it is a level that's beyond. That's why it's called Hu. And then there's what he would call Zeh, or Ato would be the level of Mamala Kalam, and that's already the 10 spheres. The immanent faculties, the Keches Pnimium, where the divine energy enters into and relates to existence. So there's two levels of Hu. In the Makif itself, the Makif for Kedusha, which is Hu of Kedusha, like Avram, Hu Avram, Chamisha L'Teva, from the Heich Sadim, the 5 levels of kindness. And then there's the Heich Gevurah, Hu, that becomes the root, after long Ishtalshlus, into the things that are the negative things, like Nimrod was the first of the 5. L'Ra, that may reflect more divisiveness, separation from godliness, which is the antithesis, of course, to Kedusha. And there they get chayis, but it's a chayis in the form of the makif, and it comes in a very tzimtzumdik way. So he calls it nefila and shvira, and that's what feeds and sustains the negative forces. The Avi's goal is, of course, to transform that as well, which we shall talk about, or we did talk about. That is done through reaching Atik, less smoila b'hayatika. Atik is higher than these 2 levels of good, because it's the third level. It's that third level that the Medrash calls Kudshabrich. There's Tov Mekulan. There's Chadhu that's Tov Mekulan, as he said. Chadhu the Tov Mekulu. That's higher than them all. That's a Teiv, and that's a Hu that's higher than the Hu of the Makif of Kedusha, or the Makif of that feeds into the L'Ra, L'Umazah, the negative side. That Hu is connected to Atik, the Tov Mekula, like he said, Islon Chad, the Tov Mekula, which he compares to the Bris, which is Mechuven Be'emsa. The 10 fingers, as the Sefer Yetzirah says, is the right hand, 5 fingers, Chesed, and the left hand, 5 fingers, Gevurah. That's like the Heich Sadim, the Heich Gevurahs, the Teiv, L'Teva, the Chamisha L'Teva, the 5 for good, and Chamisha and 5 Hu, where it says L'Ra. But then there's the Bris, which is in the center, and that connects to Das, which connects all the way to Keser, to Primus HaKeser. So in the Tiferes, that's called the Bris. And as he explained, Yesh Leimad, he said that this Bris Mechuven Be'emsa is the Primus of the Tiferes. In other words, in the Tiferes themselves, there's a Chetzenius. That's when you count the outer level of Keser, Arich. You don't count Das. But when you count the Primus, then you count Das, Primus Atzmus Ein Sof through Das, and that's Be'emtza. That's why it's Be'emtza, is the Bechinas HaPrimus, Shegam Be'eses Riz, Meir Bechinas Zu. That also in Mamala Kalaman, also in the level of the Primus of the spheres, through the Bris, you also have that level. If without that, you have Chesed and Gevurah, 2 kavim, to the right and to the left. But if you want to reach the Hu of Atik, which is rooted in all the way to in the Sharshei, before the Tzimtzum, in the Helama Atzmi of Shmaya Atzmi, all the way in the root, to bring that down into the spheres, that goes through the middle path, which is Das, which then connects to the Bris, which is also Be'emsa. That's where we're up to. So in sum total, what you have here is all about the integration of these different levels. So there are different levels, and we have to go step by step, as we constantly emphasize. But the ultimate goal is joining them, of course. But that, of course, is a big achievement. And La'asid Lave will be when it's all integrated, as we shall learn later, more detail about it. Now we'll continue. He's going to continue to speak a little more about this Emsa, this middle path, the Emsa of the Bris, which is connected to the Chadhu B'lei B'chushban, like he said. That's higher than the Chomesh Keneged Chomesh. Yeah. Okay. If anybody has any questions about my summary right now, I'm happy to answer anything. And if not, we will continue reading inside. So he says like this now. This is a third of the line that begins Hapnimius on page 1416. Pages, if you want to follow them, can be found at ayinbeis.com. So he says, V'yesh lemer gamkein. Another yesh lemer. So he said the first yesh lemer, he said that the bris, mechuven be'emtza, is the primus of the spheres. That was the first thing he said. Now he's adding another point. V'yesh lemer gamkein be'emtza, when it says be'emtza, so now before the first interpretation, he said be'emtza is like be'primus. So it's not just emtza technically in the middle, it's the inner dimension. So there's right and left. So when you have something, you have, let's say, a structure, right and left are on the periphery, they're on the side. And emtza is the primus, the inner dimension. Now he says, be'emtza b'chinas kav emtzai. So of course connected, and we already referred to it. Kav emtzai means the middle path, or the middle line, or the middle track. B'chinas ha-tiferes. So till now he's mentioning Keser, and he mentioned Das, and of course Yesod is the Bris. Now he's bringing Tiferes. Tiferes is called the Kav HaMetzai. So again, just to sum up, when the spheres are when the spheres are structured like a human, just like a human being is not one straight line. There's a right side, there's a left, and there's a center. So the spheres are structured like a segel. You'll see sometimes that image. Chochmah to the right, Bina to the left. Das in the center. Chesed to the right, Gevurah to the left, Tiferes in the middle, in the center. Then comes the next three, is Netzach to the right, Hoy to the left, and Yesod, Bris, the center, and then Malchus. So it's essentially three diagonal, and then another three, and then the final Malchus makes for 10 spheres. Keser would be the crown all the way on top, which is also center. And that's why it says Das connects to Keser all the way to Primus Keser. But as we said, you can't count them both in 10 spheres. So there's the question of the Chetzenius or Primus when you count Keser, when you count Das. So Kavem Soy is essentially, it's like the spine in the human body. You think of it. Sometimes the expression of Tiferes would be Mavriach min akotza lakotza. In the Mishkan, they also had three. When they connected the walls in the Mishkan, in the temple, in the portable temple, so it said there were badim. There was a brichim, I should say. So the brichim were like, they connected wall to wall. So each wall, how did it stand steady, connected to the next wall? So they connected this type of hatch, or you can say a bridge that connected these two. But still, you want to have some centrifugal force that makes sure that it's all uniform. So the pasuk says, "Briach hatichen." There was a middle briach, tichen, middle, not connecting one wall to the next. That ran minakotza elakotza. That went from one end of the Mishkan to the other. And there are different opinions on that, but generally the opinion is it actually went around. It was a miracle. But bottom line is, for sure went across. So when you build something in any engineering, you need to connect the pieces, but then you need one big beam, so to speak, what they call sometimes the foundational beam, that connects everything, that makes sure that everything is solidly in place. So briach hatichen amavriach min akotza lakotza, that runs from one end to the other end. So that Kabbalah Chesed and Chesed explain is the Tiferes that runs from one end to the other. So he says Tiferes is the Kavam Tzai, Sha'ela Ada Keser. Tiferes is Ela Ada Keser, because remember the middle path has its own track. It bypasses the right and the left. So Tiferes connects the Das all the way to Keser. And the same day way down to Yesod and to Malchus. So he says, okay, V'hainu b'chinas primis ha-Keser. And which level of Keser? Primis ha-Keser, like we've been learning, Atik. V'ay ma shekoser b'sidr b'shar ha-moyedim. Tells us to look in the Siddur. This is the Siddur of the Mittler Rebbe composed Siddur of all the Maimorim that the Alter Rebbe said connected to Siddur. It's called the Siddur. Shar HaMoedim is the section on the holidays. So there he says, the Kamoy Kain, who b'chinas Pnimi Zah. So Tiferes, of course, is one of the 6 spheres of Zah. Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Yesod. So he broadens it that the same as the Pnimi Zah. So now you see, the Pnimius of Zah is like the Pnimius of the Tiferes, has somewhat also an element like Tiferes, because Tiferes is the level of Pnimius Zah. What's the Pnimius of Zah? What is the Kavam Tzai in Zah? Is primarily it's Tiferes. Al pi Kabbalah Arizal, and he explains that according to the Kabbalah of the Arizal. Ulechein Kavam Tzai Koilal u'mechaber mechaber Beis HaKavim D'Yamin Small. And that's why this middle beam or this middle track, middle kav, this middle line, it encompasses and integrates and attaches and connects the 2 kavim of Yamin and Shmol. So they're not separate from them. It's a connector. It's an interface between them. So, for example, whenever you see, again, engineering, nothing can stand without at least 3 legs. And the same thing you'll see in any engineering, you have the right and the left, and you have the center. What would be a human being without how would we be able to stand upright or even function if we didn't have a spine? And I don't mean now the spinal cord, the very spine. The spine creates a certain, as I said, centrifugal force that creates balance in the person. If the spine, God forbid, in any way is injured, it'll affect walking, it'll affect posture, it'll affect the whole structure, because you need that middle beam, so to speak, that holds things up. So it's not just a spine, it's also a connector, and in a sense gives balance to the right and to the left by being that middle ground, that middle path, that middle spine. So it connects, he says, it encompasses and connects the 2 kavim of Yamin and Shmol. The Ayin Beis, and what is the significance of that connection? Remember here, we're not talking engineering, we're talking in the spiritual level. What's the significance of Tiferes, the Kavam Tzai's connection? He says, "Who the smaller is skolal b'yamina," that the small, which means Gevurah, should be encompassed in Yamin and Chesed. V'hainu, what does that mean? Shegam midas hadin, that also midas hadin, Gevurah, small, the midah, the attribute of judgment, which is more harsh, more disciplined, more concealed, nepach lebchinas harachamim, should be transformed to compassion. So that's what the Tiferes accomplishes. This is what you have. So you have, let's say, a bezdin of 3. One person says and someone is standing trial, and he's being accused of something. One of them says he should be acquitted. He's not guilty. The other one says he is guilty, based on evidence and based on witnesses. Comes the third one, says the kava machliya, what we call sometimes the shlishi machliya, the third one, that reconciles, like we say every morning, that there are 2 verses, Shnei Ksuvim Makishim Zeh, Uba Kosav Ashlishi, and the third verse comes, Shamachliya Beineim, that reconciles and explains how both of them can be joined together. So the third party says, well, I see merit in the case, and I rule that he should be not guilty. So of course, 2 against 1, and 3 ultimately transforms the din to Rachamim. Why is it transforming? Why is it not overriding? Because at the end of the day, firstly, once there's that psak, they all have to agree to it. And more importantly, compassion can say that even if you have a case that maybe there's something about the person that you should apply din, there's still a thing called Rachamim. I'm adding a little explanation to this. which is why on Rosh Hashanah, which is a Yom Adin, we say the Eibishter goes from Kisei Harach, he moves to Kisei Hadin, and then through our Tfilis and through our Shefer, we want Hashem to go and move from Kisei Hadin to Kisei Rachamim. Basically, it's the transformation of Din to Rachamim, which is ultimately the goal of transforming even the negative forces. Now remember, Din here in Hey Gevurah is not a negative thing. It's Hey Gevurah of Kedusha. But from that can be Nishtalshal, can evolve the Ra, the Hey Ra. And now we have a power because of the third element by reaching into Atik through Kavam Soy of Tiferes, through the, like he said before, he said less small that it has the power, less smaller Bahayatika, that has the power to ultimately transform even the din to chesed, which we spoke about yesterday briefly, that we learned about this when we were talking about the interface mamata lamayla. If you remember the three ways that you're sweeten the gvuras. One is by overriding it with like let's say bitter waters. You bring enough sweetness, sweet water, it'll cancel out and overshadow, so to speak, the bitter. But that's not transforming the bitter. That's just like overriding it, so to speak, or what would be the word? It would be overpowering it. Then there's the second level that you actually change the bitter to good, but it's being done through the sweet. The sweet is transforming the bitter. And there was the third level, Gvuras Nimtakim B'Sharshim, that the Gvuras themselves get sweetened and they're sourced because they're rooted in the Helam Atzmi. And that's what we called either hitting rock bottom from a state of distress, a state of where a person comes to a point where even though they're in the darkest place, that darkest place reveals the highest levels. But that's all mamata lamayla. Here we know we're talking, generally speaking, mamayla lamata. So mamayla lamata, we're talking teira and so on, but we're reaching levels that are not just in the shtalshlus, where chesed and gevurah are two different kavim. We're reaching through the kavim tzoy to pnimius keser, which is atik, and that's giving us the power to transform the din to rachamim, which is the purpose of the kavim tzoy, that even in the world of ishtalshlus and malakalam, where there could be two different approaches to something, one is guilty, one is not guilty, one is chesed, one is gevurah, that we're transforming the din to gevurah. That's what the kavim tzoy accomplishes. But that is through avodah. That doesn't just happen on its own. That requires, whether it requires tshuva or requires other methods that we achieve that. Tshuva would be ultimately mamata lamayla, ultimate tshuva. But there are other levels of way we transform, which we'll discuss as we go further. The different ways that you transform the darkness to light. Like he's been speaking before, Chesed and Keira would be where they're equal. But then you go to a place which is higher than darkness and light, and then everything is driven by light, by Yaakov, like we discussed and learned. So this is Chabrus, Iskala b'yamina, that the left is encompassed in the yamin, that's midas adin, epich midas harachmin. And now this connects it back to the Medrash. What did the Medrash say about who? The higher level of who? That's higher than Chesed and Gevurah, higher than L'Teva L'Ra. He called it, if you recall, that he said, Islan Chad Hu Tov Mekulan. What is that? The who, the posuk, who Hashem Elokeinu b'chala aretz, mishpatav, who Hashem Elokeinu b'chala aretz mishpatav, and he says, Shemidas Rachamov le'elam. So when we talk about the who, that's higher than Chesed and Gevurah, the ultimate who, what he called Atik, Primius Keser, he connects it with Midas Rachamov le'elam. That means b'chala aretz mishpatav. Who Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem, of course, is Rachamim. Elokeinu is usually din. It says b'chol ha'aretz mishpatav, and all the land is mishpatav, but you're transforming the midas hadin into midas harachmim, because midas harachmim are le'elam, are forever, both in time and in space. Le'elam meaning a level of nitzchi that's not subject to any shinui. You recall we spoke about who that the ultimate nitzchius, the eternal, the absolute form of eternity is even higher than Sevav Kalaman, is Atzmus Ein Sof, which is this level, Tov Mekula. So now he says like that, V'zeh inyan hu havaya lekeinu b'chol ha'aretz mishpatav shemidas rachamov le'elam. So now we're accessing that level where midas rachamov le'elam. That is this level, that the third level that we're discussing. So in addition to combining Sevav and Mamala, it also transforms Din to Rachamim. Okay. Any questions? Yesh Leimer, and we can say, remember, who does this correspond to? We know Avram is Chesed, Yitzchak is Gevurah. Who is Tiferes? Yaakov. The Yesh Leimer shezeu kinyan de nachlis Yaakov and nachle bli memtzarim.
Not a question, just all you spoke before about Kava Yamin, Kava Smoel, Kava Emtsoi. It's known with the name Chachan Bagad Atik. It's the Kava Yamin is Chochmo, Chesed, and
Netzach.
then Kava Smoel is Bino, Gevurah, and Hoid. And Kava Emtsoi is Das, Tiferes, and Yesod, Malchus.
Yeah. Okay. So now he says, V'yesh Leimer, shezeu ke'inyan de nachlis Yaakov hinachle bli mitzarim. So the Gemara says, by the Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, that Yaakov, which is the level of Tiferes, is called Nachlas Yaakov. His inheritance is called Anachle Bli Mitzarim, meaning an inheritance without limits, without boundaries. It's like Bli Gvur, essentially. The Chesed Gevurah Hariyim Hofchim U'Menagdim Zelazeh. When you talk about Chesed and Gevurah, they are two different, they're antithetical, and they're opposites, and they oppose one another. Like I mentioned before, if you apply Chesed, that's showing kindness. Gevurah is showing din, judgment, or guilty or not guilty in the language of legal language, or us, or muter or usr, permitted or not, or potter or muter, etc. Potter or chayiv. So they alone are two different kavim. Even in Kedusha, they're two different kavim. They're two different approaches. When God is in the state of judgment, there's a state of judgment, and there's a state of compassion. Yes, you want the compassion to override the judgment, but on their own, it's two kavim, what he calls hofchim and menagdim zelazeh. They're opposites and they oppose one another. Being the fact that Chesed and Gevurah have these two different positions, so Chesed itself does not permeate all levels. There's a hefsek, there's a pause, because Chesed has its opinion, Gevurah has a different opinion. So Chesed does not affect Gevurah. Mipnei midas sagvurah, due to midas sagvurah. So if one judge in the Bezdin says this person is not guilty, based on my conclusions, that's not la'elam, that's not bli mitzarim, because the other judge says, 1 second, Gevurah says, no, that's not the case. We have a different position. So you see right away that Chesed is bound to its world called Chesed. In the world of Chesed, Chesed dominates, but not in the world of Gevurah, because Gevurah opposes it. So you can't. So you call that a hefsek. You can't call that unlimited flow. Avol Tiferes, but the third dimension, Tiferes Rachamim, shekel Chesed Gevurah, that encompasses both of them, both Chesed and Gevurah. Umata midas Gevurah gam ken lebchinas Chesed, like I said before, and it can cause Gevurah to incline toward Chesed, because Tiferes is the third party. Think of it, the mediator, the third opinion, and he comes and convinces that even midas Gevurah should also see the merit in this person. Chesed stated its opinion. Gevurah opposed it. Tiferes, which has the ability to rise above both, is able to mata midas Gevurah gam ken lebchinas Chesed al kain he nachle bli mitzarim. So Tiferes enters into the domain of Gevurah. It doesn't override it. It doesn't argue with it. It enters there, and that's why it's nachle bli mitzarim, because it has no limit. It's not limited to its own world. It's also affecting the other two, Chesed and Gevurah. She'ein b'zeh agbola v'hefsek klal, because this midas Tiferes, this kavam tzoi, does not have any limit and any pause at all. Hefsek meaning atkan, like a boundary. Now he says it very briefly here. Another Maimorim of Chassidus talks about it at length. I'll just give one example. I mentioned before there's two ways to look at Tiferes. One is that the mediator comes and explains to both parties that each of you have a merit in what you're arguing, but I have a deeper way of looking at it, and both of them agree. So both the Chesed agrees that the Gevurah has a point, and Gevurah agrees that the Chesed has a point, and Tiferes is able to find a middle ground, so to speak, and reconcile. Again, it's not just two against one. He actually convinces, Machriya Beineim. Another approach, another aspect Chassidus talks about is how Rachamim overrides Gevurah. What is compassion? Chesed could argue this person does not deserve, Chesed could say this person deserves kindness. He did something good. Gevurah comes and argues, no, the person also did some things that deserve punishment or deserve judgment, let's call it that. I don't like the word punishment. Deserve discipline. And Chesed has nothing to say because you're right, it's true. It's not like, we're not talking about an argument of the facts. It's an argument of looking at the whole picture. Comes to Tiferes and says like this, even though you're right, Gevurah, this person may have deserved certain discipline, but God created us also with a thing called compassion, have mercy. Compassion doesn't always mean that he didn't do anything wrong. It means that we're going even to a deeper place and saying, yes, I did something wrong, but I'm asking for forgiveness. Or I'm overriding that by saying, please show some compassion. Sometimes you have to show compassion and overlook certain things. Obviously, decision has to be made each case by case. So there's that element. So what does Gevurah have to say to that? Gevurah cannot argue with that because Gevurah is limited to its world. The world of compassion opens up a whole nur, like he says, Nachle bli mitzarim, bli hefsik, bli gvul, v'hefsik klal. Because Rachamim opens up compassion even in a case which may not deserve it. And Chesed can only talk about what the person deserves. Rachamim says, even if he doesn't deserve it, give it to him anyway. Because we're showing Rachmanis, which is what compassion is, that you overlook certain things, whatever the reason may be. Again, we're not talking about overlooking something that shouldn't be overlooked. You show compassion to the wrong people, you end up being cruel to the right people, like the expression goes. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about every instance, but where Rachamim is valid, opens up the world of, when you tell somebody, yes, you're right, your husband did something wrong, or your friend. You know what? In the scheme of things, let's look at the big picture. You don't always have to be right. Forgive, overlook. What are you doing? You're showing a person how to expand their horizons. That you don't have to always, even if you may be right. I mean, we're not talking about on paper, you may be completely correct. But we're not in a court of law here. And we're not looking, everything should be right. We're looking that life should go on. And sometimes when that happens, certain things should be overlooked. More than the world is not really overlooked. The word is more show compassion. So compassion opens up, the Kavem Tzoy, what he's saying, opens up a channel all the way to Primis HaKeser. You're drawing down levels of energy that are not limited like Chesed and Gevurah are. Chesed and Gevurah are critical because you need to have structure. There's no question, you always need structure. But from time to time, Tiferes, always, but Tiferes plays a tremendous role because it can bring in a level of bligvul into this world of gvul that we can bring even into that situation, a level of compassion that he calls nachla bli mitzarim. And that's what he's calling the kavem tzoy here. So in addition to what he said earlier about being the pnimius of the spheres, he's now adding another element, kavem tzoy, which, what does that mean? That is the middle that balances the two, integrates them, and essentially transforms din to what he called midas din, nepach lebechinas harachamim. Okay. V'zeu mipnei. Let's just conclude, and then I'll stop for more questions if there are. Mipnei shebetiferes meir bechinas atzmus ein sof, the less smaller b'hayatika. How does Tiferes have this power to do it? It's a sphere. It's actually a sphere that comes after Chesed and Gevurah, because Tiferes has an additional quality in it. It's kavem tzoy, which allows it to penetrate, to reach all the way to Primis HaKeser, which is Atik. And what do you have in Atik? Less smaller by Atika. In Atik, there's no small. There's no left side. Because there, it's Kulei it's Kulei Chesed. I wouldn't say the word Kulei Chesed, let's call it Rachamim. But there, it's Kulei Tev. And that's what gives Tiferes the power to create the Rachamim that we need to be able to so-called transform the Midas Hadin and cause it to have compassion, even in a case where din would be applicable. And finally, let's just read till the end of the paragraph. Ubezoya Yisrei, Daf Pei Ayin Beis, it's quoting a Zohar, Yisrei, in 88b, the Besudasa Tlisa. So the 3 meals of Shabbos correspond to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, with the third meal being Keneged Yaakov. So he says, the third meal, the Zohar says, that refers to the eating of the meal, that I will feed you, the Nachlis Yaakov Avicha. The what? The inheritance of Yaakov, your father, the patriarch Yaakov. Because the third meal corresponds to Yaakov. So what does that mean? That the third Suda, actually I think the Gemara says it too, is the Nachla Bli Mitzarim. Actually in next week's Parsha we'll read Vayetze, where it talks about Ufaratz the Yom of Akevim with Safein of Anegba, the blessing that Yaakov receives is Nachla Bli Mitzarim. What is Ufaratz the Yom of Akevim with Safein of Anegba? That your children will spread everywhere. No limits. Yom of Akevim, east and west, Safein of Anegba, north and south. So the Gemara calls that Bli Mitzarim. If someone's living in one area, north or south, or a few of them, that still has a limit. But Nachla Bli Mitzarim means spread everywhere. That's Yaakov. So the Zohar is connecting that to the third meal. Nachlis Yaakov Avichu va'ayim asher kosav al zeh b'sidr. He brings again the sidr b'sudas shachris. So the sidr, and when he talks about Shabbos, he talks about the 3 meals. The suda shachris. So the sudas, of course, in the evening. Leil Shabbos, shachris. That's after davening, meaning after musaf. And then the suda shlishis, shalosh sudas, the third meal. So in Besuda Shachris, he says, Shazeu Gilib Chinas Atik Bezah. That this revelation of the third meal, which is feeding, sustaining, the Suda of Yaakov, Nachal B'Mitzarim, is what? Is the Gili of Atik and Zah. Exactly what we're learning here. That you're drawing from Atik, which is less smaller, there's no small there, into Zah. We said before, Pnimi Zah, and of course the center of Zah is Tiferes. So that connects it to what we just learned. And one final thing he says, he tells us to look earlier. This is in volume 2, page 1096, Aleph Tzadik Vav, where he discussed at length the Inyan Gimel Sudas, the Shabbos. There he discussed at length the 3 meals of Shabbos. The Hainu B'chinas Pnimius Atik. There he said that this is the level, not just of Atik, Pnimius Atik, the third meal, Yaakov. V'zeu Shemidus Rachamov La'elam. And that's the meaning, Shemidus Rachamov. We're talking about who? Hashem Elokeinu. Ha'aretz Mishpotov, B'chol ha'aretz Mishpotov. So the Medrash says, Midus Rachamov La'elam. So La'elam here, now you understand, La'elam being like Bli Mitzarim. La'elam can mean forever, in time. But La'elam also can mean everywhere in all levels. So that's Midas Rachamim La'elam, the who of, that's Tov Mekulu, the Chad. Like we've talked about the level of Yachid, that's higher than than Chesed and Gevurah, which is 5 L'Teva and 5 L'Ra. This Chad is this level that creates Midas Rachamim La'elam of Zah or Tiferes, drawing from Atik, Pnimius Atik, into the Midas, into the Tiferes, and therefore transforming Din to Rachamim. And with that, he concludes this paragraph. And this Inyan, actually, this ends a certain section here, but I'll stop here for questions. And then what I do see is new ideas that I think I did not pick up the first time we learned it. No surprise. Every time you learn, you see new things, new ideas, but I'll share that after we pause for questions or clarity, or anybody wants to comment.
These kavim, here we talked mainly for this class about the kava emtsai, the center line. Yeah. Are these, I know this is all, well, it's not conceptual, it's real in the spiritual realms, but is it a conceptual alignment of those I don't know, segments of the Seder Hishtalshelus that are in alignment in a line, or is it Davka a line itself, like they're mamish connected? Or I mean, in other words, you could say there's a line between points that are in this that are aligned in the center, and you could say, well, imagine a line that connects all these central points, like Tiferes and Das and Malchus. You can say these points in the Seder Hishtalshelus, they're aligned, but there's not davka a line that connects them. They sort of manifest a certain quality that they all share. So I know you don't understand the question.
Are you talking about you can't apply? It's not linear physical objects that you.
I know that. Of course, right.
It's conceptual connections. It's all archetypes. So I'm not clear what the two options that you're offering here.
Yeah, I'm not sure I am either, other than to say, is the Kav itself considered a spiritual
Which Kav
entity?
are you talking about now?
Kav Emsai.
So look, I mean, to put it in very simple terms, Hashem Echad, before the Tzimtzum, there were no Kavim, there were no structures, everything was seamless, divine cosmic energy, divine consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Pure. The Tzimtzum is already, God is applying another power of his, we'll call it the power of Gevurah, of Tzimtzum Din, to conceal. Obviously, the concealment is not from his point of view, it's only from the point of view of whoever will be the recipient, like the teacher concealing. So now that he's created that space, now can come structure, because the divine unity is not all pervasive in a conscious, revealed way. So the first thing that comes is the Kav Chut. It's also called Kav, but there it's not yet broken into details. It's one Kav, one line. Think of it like a laser beam of intense, concentrated energy, drawing from before the Tzimtzum, but now it's concentrated, and it will begin to shape existence. You know, literally like any process, like the conception of a child. It starts with one cell, and that cell is very concentrated, and that cell will slowly split into 2 cells, into 4 cells, 8 cells. Just bear with me, you'll see where I'm going. So the Kav will begin to do its work, create the highest worlds that are still very amorphous and very nebulous, not real structure yet, but it's beginning. Like exactly the best example would be the
development of a fetus.
The stages of a child's development. Yes, a fetus of development. Where literally in the beginning you don't see anything, you see a speck. But that speck will develop, and 9 months later, you're going to have a full-blown child with kavim, with a right arm and a left arm and a middle and a brain and everything. So the same idea here. As the Hishtalshelus evolves, especially Akudim, for example, which comes after Ak, is 10 energies in one container. So it's still one container, but the energies have begun to emerge. Then there'll be 10 energies in 10 containers. That's Toyu, or Nekudim. And the problem there is they're not yet interconnected properly. So you have 10 energies that are like what they call kavim nefrodim or nekudis nefrodim. In Tikkun, Atzilus, is where it finally comes together that not only you have 10 energies in 10 containers, but you also have what we call hiskalulus, the interconnectivity of them all. So you have kavim, now you have a right, left, and a center. Think of a baby that has now a structure, but they also communicate with each other. It's not 3 different paths. 3 kavim, but it's all one part of one body. So in a healthy person, you have what I always call harmony within diversity. In a way, the harmony part is associated with Tiferes, but the diversity is still there, but they're all working together like there's an invisible conductor that is making sure that all the pieces of the symphony are working hand in hand. So you have kavim, but you also have kavim that work together. Whereas in Toyu, you have structure, but you don't have the interconnectivity yet in place. That's why it's imbalanced, and that's why it ultimately creates shviras hakelim, a shattering, because it's not balanced properly. It's like building a piece of engineering that wasn't properly configured, and ultimately it will shatter in some way, which is another discussion not relevant here. So kavim, essentially, that we're talking about are these structural elements in Hishtalshelus. Now, of course, this is not yet physical, but it's conceptual, and it is definitely the archetypes. that slowly, as that evolves into Bri, Yetzirah, Asiya, and Asiya Gashmis, then you'll actually have a right arm and a left arm and a center, like we say in Pasuk Chalio every Friday. The right arm is Chesed, and the left arm is Gevurah, and the center is Tiferes, etc.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned
the key thing that he's emphasizing here is that even in the world of structure of a malakalam, where Elokus is manifesting in the structure of existence, we're also finding the pnimius of the spheres, or the kav emtsai, we're able to draw from Atik, from that higher level of unity, chadhu, all the way into the structure itself. That's the main, ultimately, punchline here.
Yeah, I hear. Beautiful. Thank you.
You mentioned that there was nothing before, yet then there's a kav all of a sudden. At least at Simpson it comes from. I'm thinking that Tiferes has to be rooted somehow in the idea.
Let me just
of
correct you. It's not all of a sudden. It's happening right now. It's perpetual.
Right, of course.
It's a conceptual process, basically.
Yeah. Yes, of course. That's what I meant without saying it. But
Okay.
But nevertheless, Tiferes seems to be connected somehow, this kava mitzvah, to the idea of Simpson to begin with, only from the point of view maybe of Hashem created the world first with Chesed, then he realized that was too much and had to create it with Din. And so this whole idea that he could manifest himself down here, we could be here with some type of perceptions, seems to be a mixture of this from the kava mitzvah, which happens.
Chesed does talk about the before the Tzimtzum as being Chesed, the Tzimtzum as being Gevurah, like Elokim, and the Kav being like Tiferes, that is able to bring light even into a world of after the Tzimtzum. So that's what that's the structure that is discussed in Chassidus.
Yeah, I mean, even to say
places.
him and his name, who is Shmo Bilvad, at that point when he's just
that's
Shmo,
another story. Who is Shmo Bilvad is not that.
It's already a no, but it's already something that's happening that's creating it's him, but not him.
Well, we don't call it creating. We don't call it Simpson. Let's not conflate things. Talking about Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, I just described it. You're talking about who is Shmo Bilvad is a completely different subject matter.
Okay. Nevertheless, what connection I'm trying to make now is just between Simpson and the Kav Matsoi, that it seems like it is a combination of Chesed and Gevurah.
I just said the light before the Simpson would be Chesed, the Simpson would be Gevurah, Din, and the Kav that comes, the light that comes afterwards would be like Tiferes.
Okay, so you said that Simpson is Gevurah, yet Simpson comes because it's like I'm talking, but yet I have to hold back some thoughts, so that's a Tzimtzum. At the same time, I'm expressing myself.
Called Gevurah.
So I have both.
That's what Gevurah does. It holds back.
It holds back the Chesed, but it still seems to be a connection, a combination of Chesed and Gevurah.
No, where do you
can't
see
have
Chesed
Gevurah if I don't have Chesed.
No, Tzimtzum itself is complete concealment. There's no Chesed. There's no light at all. It's total.
But it's a desire to reveal oneself in a Tzimtzum Dikafor. I mean, if there's no Tzimtzum, there's no revelation
what's your
at
point?
all.
Well, he said
my point is
the purpose of the Tzimtzum.
Yeah.
The Tzimtzum itself is Gevurah. The purpose of it is to ultimately reveal. That's fine.
Ultimately revealed. But even in Gevurah, we could say, so that's why I'm just trying to make a connection.
Not necessarily, no. You don't say,
and
you say the purpose of Gevurah is to reveal, but you don't say that Gevurah is revealing.
It's not revealing by itself, certainly. But with the aid of Chesed, mixed with, obviously, Gevurah has to mitzamsim.
Well, let's put it this way. If there was no Tiferes and no Kav, we would just have concealment and nothing would happen. So you need to have another step.
Right. So that's what I'm just asking you about, how it is rooted, to understand it, even Lifnei Tzimtzum, how the Kava Matzoy is mushrush in just the idea of Tzimtzum to begin with.
It's not rooted in Tzimtzum. It's nothing to do with Tzimtzum. The Kava Matzoy is rooted in the Kav, which is rooted in Pnimius Atik. And not obviously everything is rooted in God. There's one God that is the source of everything. But then it comes down into different tracks. One reveals, one conceals, one comes after the concealment.
You just said something that was really interesting. I had not thought to relate this kava emsai with the kava chut that penetrates the tzimtzum, but now you just associated them. They're not the same thing, are they?
It's rooted. Tiferes is a sphere in Atzilus. The Kav
Right.
is the Oyer that comes after the Tzimtzum. It has a
Right.
connection to it. That's I just said.
That's all.
It's not that. So I mean, depends how you understand that.
Well, everything's related to the
I mentioned that. Look,
everything's
he's not
supposed
talking here about the Kav or Chut.
I didn't
I
think so.
mentioned because the fellow was asking the question, so I wanted to put it in context that in some Maimorim it talks about Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes as being the Oyer before the Tzimtzum. The Gevurah is the Tzimtzum, and Tiferes is.
I see.
So these are three
Manifestation of
kavim
the
that,
outside.
yes, they're basically three, as I said, archetypes. You could identify them in those highest levels. What he's talking about here is in the spheres of Atzilus, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, and Atzilus.
Even in Esespheres Aganuzis, the idea of having the Rishimu and the Kav that's Lifnei Tzimtzum is already an inyan of preparing for the Tzimtzum, so to speak, no?
You're asking me if the 10 revealed spheres are rooted in the 10 hidden spheres, correct? But they're called hidden for a reason. Hidden doesn't just mean they're under the blanket. Hidden means they're fundamentally not spheres yet. They're just for us to speak about how God is preparing the ground for what would come later. So correct.
A Yechilis, you might say.
Not really. Yechilis is an Atzmus. Look, I feel like you're conflating many, many levels here. Yechilis we talk about as an Atzmus. That's not the level of the Esesphere Sagnuzis, is not Yechilis. But I need to understand what are you getting at? What are you trying to establish?
What I'm trying to draw out of the conversation is the idea of how Tzimtzum is more rooted in Atzmus for the desire that Hashem has to reveal himself, but he can't reveal himself completely.
Yeah, but that's not the theme of the Ayin Beis.
One
second. He discussed that earlier. That's not what we're learning right now. So what you bring up
the only
is a
thing
topic.
I wanted to make is right.
Yeah, but if you go,
the only connection I wanted to make was to the.
Okay, let me just respond then. No. The point you're making was discussed earlier. I can tell you what page. I don't know if you were here in those classes, but we discussed earlier how the Tzimtzum is B'shvil Hagilui, that in order to create existence, God made that Tzimtzum, which its purpose is is ultimately that revelation would come. But that's not what we're discussing here. So I just don't. I don't like to confuse matters. That's a discussion. Deserves its own discussion. It's not what he's saying here. You want to bring that up? That's fine. So I'll tell you where it's discussed. Let's go. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. So at the end of the day, just from the beginning, I always was just trying to make a connection between the Kavah Matzoi that we have, as we talked about in Atzilus, and that with that. Sorry, make a connection with that and the idea of Tzimtzum to begin with, that it seems to be an expression.
No, I would not make that connection here. That's not, because here he's making it very clear that there's Chesed, there's Gevurah, and then comes Tiferes that introduces a whole other dimension. That's what he's discussing here. He's not even talking about Tzimtzum here, to be honest. So even Tzimtzum is not the discussion here. I have no problem going there because Gevurah is connected to Tzimtzum. But the discussion here is that Chesed and Gevurah are both limited in their scope. Each has their role to play. And Tiferes comes and accesses a deeper level in the root that can reconcile and join them together. And that's what he's saying here. That's the theme here.
Thank you.
What would you say is the highest point of the Kavah Mitzvah? Couldn't say it's Atzmus, because Atzmus doesn't. I mean, on the one hand, you would think it's.
What do you mean the highest point? You mean the root?
Yes.
Everything is rooted in Atzmus. It's not good to use that word because everything. God's only one creator.
Okay, where's the first?
So everything is rooted in Atzmus.
Yeah, it doesn't help any. You're right.
So I'm not. So you have to ask yourself what you're trying to get at here. If you're talking about where it's rooted, so to speak, what is personality?
It's first manifestation. Its first manifestation.
Its first manifestation is really in Atzilus. That's the real first manifestation in a real way.
Not Keser?
It's a structure. Keser is not called Tiferes. Then it would be called Tiferes, not called Tiferes. It's called Keser.
No, but no.
When something is rooted in something, doesn't mean it's that. 1 second. Root does not mean it's the same thing. It means it accesses it. it's rooted means it began there, but it's not that yet. I mean, it's like saying everything begins before the tzimtzum, but not everything retains before its pre-tzimtzum properties.
Okay, so are you saying that Kava MC is solely a post-Simpson concept?
I can't even answer that question. What does that mean? Nothing is a post-Simpson concept. Everything originates before the Simpson. So I'm not.
I'm not. Okay, well, this isn't that complicated. I'm not trying. I'm not blaming you. I'm not being clear enough.
There's one God that created everything. So everything originates from God.
Of course.
So I'm not sure what you're getting. And then
a line connects points. What's the highest point of the Kav Emsai? Can you say that or not?
I can't.
Okay. That's the answer. There's no answer. You have Das, you have
I don't know. I can't because I don't know what means highest point by you. You
have Atzilus and you have Das.
For example, Mount Everest, one second. Mount Everest has a highest point, and that's it. You can't go higher. What do you mean here by highest point?
The highest point is
too vague for me.
Okay, look, let me give my mashal, then you can say what's right or what's wrong. You have Atzilus, you have Das, you have Tiferes, you have Malchus. Those are all aligned in the Kav Emsai. Is that it? Are we done with the Kav Emsai, or is there something above Das of Atzilus that is part of the Kav Emsai?
Well, like he's saying here, it travels all the way to the spine travels all the way to the Keser. It goes all the way.
I said Keser, and
but there's higher than Keser too. I mean, it's not the highest point, period. Keser,
right, okay.
What he's saying here is that the Kav Emsai goes to Das, and Das goes to Primis HaKeser. Now, that doesn't mean it's Primis HaKeser. It means it accesses it, and it's rooted there.
I get it. I got it. I am totally with you. Thank you.
Now, if you talk a bigger picture, macrocosm, we talked about Atzilus the Klolos, for example, that the other fellow was referring to. Atzilus the Klolos. Then you have all this in a macrocosmic way. And then you'd say Tiferes, Hanelam of the Esesfiris Agnuzis is the root of the Kav, which goes after the Tzimtzum, which follows the before the Tzimtzum. So you could talk about it in higher levels, but again,
I see.
It's all
relative.
It's relative, and it's also not linear in a type of physical space. It's more conceptual.
I hear you. Okay.
So let's put it this way: you could talk about the concept of Tiferes all the way before the Tzimtzum, but you won't call it Tiferes there. You'll say before the Tzimtzum, you have a level of Atzmus Ein Sof that's higher than the root of Kedem Aleis HaRatzon. And Aleis HaRatzon, that gives the power to unite the two, and when it manifests in the Shtalshalos, that would be Tiferes. You see how I phrased it?
Awesome. That's what I was looking for. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry to push you.
Can you say that again?
It's on the recording.
Yeah.
Avner, you join our WhatsApp group. Would you like to join our group?
I think I'm on it.
Okay, well then just listen to the recording.
Basically, you have to. Basically, I'll just say this, and I'm fine because maybe something by me is a given. I've already developed it. I understand it, so I'll explain it. But you have to think in terms of maybe like a hologram. Everything exists everywhere. That's a given. The question is what's dominant and what's the main feature. So the fact, for example, when we say human being is created in the divine image, what does that even mean? Here's a human being. You're looking at me. I have a body made up of parts. I have faculties, whatever. The whole complexity of the human organism. It's created in the divine image. You ever think, what does that mean even? The divine has an image? That's number one. So the answer, of course, is, as we've learned, that the divine has chosen, because he has the power of Ir HaGvul and Koyach HaGvul, to manifest not his whole etzem, manifest in a structure that is a replica. We are a replica of that structure. However, we're a physical replica. What is it in the spiritual? It would be the spheres, the 10 spheres. Like he says in Tanya, the 10 spheres, from there evolved, nishtalshel mehen, the 10 koiches, faculties. So my brain, your brain, Chochma Bina Das, evolved from the Chochma Bina Das of Asiya, from Yetzirah, from Bria, all the way from Atzilus, but even higher than Atzilus, but there it's not yet a structure. It's like And then the same thing with midas, the heart. So you end up having two realities. The physical reality of the human being created in the divine image, the spiritual reality, a structure of the divine image, which is called Adam Elyon. So right there, you have it on two different paradigms, but they have a parallel between each other. Obviously, there's also differences. You can't compare Chachma Datzilis to the Chachma in your brain, even though one evolved from the other, but it came through many tzimtzumim and halamas and parsayas and partitions, etc. So the same thing you can say in Ishtalshlus, you could also say that. There's an Atzilus, then there's how Atzilus, when you compare Atzilus to higher than Atzilus. If we were created in the divine image of Atzilus, so to speak, of Adam the Atzilus, then is Atzilus have anything parallel to higher levels? So the answer is yes, but now it's getting more amorphous and more abstract, and you have to start in your mind realizing it's not the same. It's not like us compared to Atzilus, the human structure compared to Atzilus is like Atzilus compared to higher. No. Compared to higher, it becomes far more sublime and far more conceptual.
Abstract.
So when you go all the way before the Tzimtzum, for example, there you're just talking about God envisioning it all. So, as I've said a number of times, it's very hard for us to fully wrap our head around because it's hard enough for us to try to parallel Gashmias to Ruchnias, let alone Ruchnias to higher levels of Ruchnias, all the way to levels that are even beyond what we would call Ruchnias. So just keep in mind that point. But ultimately, there is, as Chassidus explains, you could identify elements, like we said here. He keeps saying, Pnimius Atik, but that's after the Tzimtzum, that's already Keser. But he says, Pnimius, B'sharshe, it's Shmaya Atzmi, what he called Helema Atzmi. That's the words he used. What means B'sharshe? Sharshe is exactly what I'm saying. He's taking now this to say that we have an element of that even before the Tzimtzum, even before any structure. God revealed to us that he wanted us to be able to connect with him. So within his own so-called Godhead, or however you explain it, I don't even want to use the word subtle. It's more it's more conceptual that God beginning that process on those highest levels. The challenge is to make sure that you're not equating, just like you wouldn't equate the physical hand and the 5 fingers to the 5 sudden in a physical way. You have to qualify it. The same thing you have to do in all those levels. I hope that was helpful.
Yes.
That makes sense?
Yeah, I think for me, it was assumed, but yes.
Okay, so that's...
But it is helpful to understand the ultimate root of it all, to see the full picture.
Yeah, that's why the Rebbe Rashab himself actually didn't stop by Atik. He said those words. He said like that. He said these words. Look at line 4 on page 1415. And he goes on to explain what Atik is b'sharshe. But sharshe and the root and then where it ends up are not the same level. It's just that it originates in some way there. Yes, and as much as, listen, whatever Chassidus reveals to us, we'll know. Things we don't know, we don't know. But that's exactly what we're saying. The Shamas are rooted all the way in that level. Helema Atzmi and Torah is rooted in Er Atzmi. That's all part of this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like a child wants to know, well, most children want to know where they come from. And they want to know their ultimate ancestor. To me, it's nice to know that ultimately I come from Adam Arisha, and I come from Avram, and I come from Moshe. It's that I'm a Levi, so it so happens to be true. But that doesn't mean I am Moshe. It doesn't mean I am Abraham. It certainly doesn't mean I'm Adam Arishon. But I like to know where I come from. So in that sense, it's very helpful.
Did I complain?
No, but no. It was a spirited conversation.
No, it's
discussion.
I've never said that this. The most I can say is that the question may not be relevant to what we're learning here. I never said a question is not a legitimate question. And in overall picture, that is what Chassidus tries to do: is go under the dashboard, or like you say, where's it all originate from, and then more than that, to help us connect to that level and bring that level down here. That's the ultimate goal: integrating these highest levels, because it's not just for information.
Of course.
A child may be curious just to be curious, but the ultimate goal is actually to connect to that.
Tachlis. Yeah.
So if a child asked me that, I said, yeah, we're rooted. We come from Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Now let's try to be like Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. You know.
Yeah, 100%. That's the talk. That's the final punchline, of course. But that's the take home. But you can't do that until you know where you come from.
Okay. Well, listen. If Ayin Beis does it, I think brilliantly, and extensively, and in a most comprehensive fashion. That's exactly.
Well, for us to be, we're sublime beings, even though we're full of gashmias and terrible things. We're also sublime. We're chelakal kalma mamish, and if we can understand our roots, our source, then we can understand what our purpose is a little bit better, and perhaps fulfill that purpose.
That's exactly the point. Yeah. Okay. So we ended the paragraph on page 1416. Look, even if you hear sometimes frustration in my voice, first of all, it's also from passion. I'm just trying to, for me, sometimes the ideas are clear and I don't always understand what the questions are. So I try to understand, but it's not coming from a critical point of view because I fully understand that these ideas need constant review and constant analysis and further so that's not ever a question. I'm not assuming, not myself and not anyone here, that we know it all and we figure it all out. So obviously there's going to be questions and there's going to be all kinds of topics. My goal is somewhat to be the referee, if you wish, like the guide, to just juggle and say, okay, here's what we're talking about here. This topic belongs there, and try to just put things into context, or else it just becomes an overwhelming mess of so many ideas and what's going on here. Like that's why I'm very adamant when I say this level belongs there, this level belongs there, because if you start mixing it all, it'll be completely impossible to wrap our heads around.
Yeah. I found today's discussion very, very helpful on some very, very esoteric subjects.
Okay. So let it continue to roll that way. And we all continue to grow. By all means, that's great.
And Avner, thank you for sparking the conversation.
Yeah.
There's a certain upleg, you might call it, or the hair, or whatever good word, internalization, sensing. If you're doing the hafshata, abstracting these concepts as best as you can, we're all different levels at different times, whatever, and to try to take that madrega that you were talking about before, Kavut, and understand it like you have said many times already in its roots, sometimes is a better understanding when that is done. In other words, learning on one level is great because that's where you're at right now on that page at that point. But some of us might need or desire that next, kind of sense of internalization will come from taking it up a notch, even though it's not relevant to the topic. Again, it's a little too abstract and so forth. And that was my point, to come to that. And I'm still adamant about what I said. I still feel correct, as weird as that sounds, because what do I know? But I just sense that there's something about the Kava Matzoy that's connected to the Simpson, which is really connected to Natsmas. And that helps me. That helps me understand the importance of what this Madregi is at the point where you're learning it now. That's. I hope I said that.
No, well, I agree with the general idea that each of us will need at different times to make those connections, by all means. At the same time, as teaching it to different people, remember, we're not sitting one-on-one here, so everybody has their own particular journey. So I have to balance all of that.
Yes.
Regarding the very topic, honestly, I don't know what you're even referring to, because there's not even a hint to that here, and I'd like to see it anywhere that the Kav Emtsoy is connected to the Tzimtzum. Obviously, everything, the Tzimtzum allows for all of existence to come into being. Here, if anything, the Kav Emtsoy actually goes beyond the Tzimtzum, because Tzimtzum is Gevurah, and Kav Emtsoy is Tiferes Rachamim. So I'm not sure where you're getting that from, just for the record. So maybe you need to look into, it could be your intuition, but it doesn't say, if anything, it says here the opposite, that Tiferes is stronger than Gevurah and overrides Gevurah, which is Tzimtzum, essentially. The Tzimtzum B'Shvil HaGilui that you're referring to is on page 1414, just 2 pages back, where he talks that the ultimate Tzimtzum, and I spoke about it at length, is like the teacher conceals the idea in order to ultimately reveal. But that's definitely a different topic, and maybe that's what you're addressing. That's fine. So, but the point of Tiferes so-called transforming din into Rachamim is more than just connected to the tzimtzum. It's transforming the din into Rachamim. So if maybe you're suggesting is that Tiferes ultimately fulfills the purpose of the tzimtzum, that's fine too. But that would be accurate, because ultimately the goal is to reveal and transform the tzimtzum into Gili, like we learned earlier in Ayin Beis. Maybe that's what you're referring to. So the Kav Emtsoi definitely plays a tremendous role in that. That what you mean?
Well, I think that's exactly what I was asking for you to express. What maybe I was thinking. That is, I had to say maybe because I can't express it as well as you do.
Okay, no, fine.
I think
let me tell you. So
what you just did was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll tell you even furthermore. A big theme of Ayin Beis, especially in Volume 2 and leading into Volume 3, was the question: can a post-Tzimtzum reality experience pre-Tzimtzum consciousness? And the answer is yes, by transforming the Tzimtzum, because the purpose of the Tzimtzum is ultimately to reveal. So in that context, yes, Tiferes or Rachamim or reaching Pnimius Atik through our Aveda does achieve that. Like he said earlier about Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim about Shema, that Mesiras Nefesh he spoke about, that has the power. What was the words there that he said? Has the power. What was about? But he spoke about the Psik Taima, that Havaya that has the power. Yeah. That there's the Havdalah between the structures, and then there's the, let me just see. Through Gibus and Mesiras Nefesh of Krishma, you create the Ischabrus of the higher and the lower, Mamala and Sevav. So he does say that there. And essentially, ultimately, Tiferes is the one that creates that connection between the two levels, between Chesed and Gevurah. So in that sense, if that's what you meant, then that is correct and is accurate in the context. I thought you were talking about something else, but okay, it's fine. So we come to that, that's good.
Rabbi
Jacobson, I don't know. Oh, sorry. Rabbi Jacobson, I don't know if you want to even answer this question. That's my burning question, and I could wait all the way to the end. But I one thing that's like stuck to me was that whole concept that we talked about, the sweetening of the waters. That there was one that was with basically overwhelming, the sweetness would overwhelm the bitterness, and the other one was that it would convince the bitterness of it, even though it wouldn't be 100% on board because of the awe and reverence of the judge. That was the mashal or Hashem, and then the third was the transformative, the bitter waters with the stick. That was complete transformation. So, is it too early to bring that in and to kind of put it in the avoda aspect of life on how that takes place, or do you think we should wait all the way to the end?
Well, I mentioned it earlier in this class. I don't know if you picked it up.
Yes, that's why I'm bringing it up, because you mentioned it. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but the reason I hesitate in bringing it literally, I did bring it, is because that was discussed when we talked about the interface from the bottom up, Momata Lamaila. That ultimately, that third level you just described, that the Gevurah themselves get transformed, that sounds much from Momata Lamaila. And here we're talking Momaila Lamata. So I'm not so sure yet how we associate. Are the first two levels of the sweetening of the bitter connected to Momaila Lamata, and Momaila Lamaila is primarily the third level that you just mentioned? Or do we have the three levels, both the Momaila Lamaila and Momaila Lamata? That's what's not so 100% clear to me. But for all purposes, there's no question the interface of transforming the bitter to sweet, or we could say the din to Rachamim, like he's speaking here, there are different ways that could happen. It could happen, like you said, from the top down. It could happen from something in between, or it could be from the bottom up completely. Here, he's not discussing right now which way. He just says that's what happens. I would submit, because this is now talking after page 1350 of Momaila Lamata, that this is probably more the Momaila Lamata approach, through Torah. That we're doing it through Torah, whereas earlier he spoke through distress, which would be hitting rock bottom and coming from the bottom up. So, but it's definitely connected. I would probably wait just to see, because he never gets back to it. Like in Ayin Beis, it would be nice if the Rebbe Rashab himself would compare the two, the Mamat Lamayl, the Mamayl Lamata. So for me, once we finish it, it'll be easier to say, okay, now that we have this whole picture, what do we learn about the Mamat Lamayl, Mamayl Lamata regarding the sweetening of the Gevurahs? But there's no question that he says it here explicitly, and I think the next section may even help us some more, because the next section talks about how do you tear up negative decrees through Amin Yehei Rabbah, and he's going to talk about Shema and so on. So it's all going to continue to talk about how you transform also the negative. And remember, in the Maimer HaMagbi, which is so fundamental, it ultimately comes down that through Shema, the Nefesh HaLekis transforms the Nefesh HaBamis, which is another form of transforming Gevurah of the Nefesh HaBamis to Kedusha, to V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha. So the theme is for sure connected. The question is, how much is it Mamat L'mayla, how much Mamayl Lamata? Am I making sense?
Of course, yeah, and that's exactly what I want to know. That because as you said,
I can't really say. I can speculate, but I'd rather wait to see more information before I create the parallel.
Yeah, fair enough.
Remember, a number of times I've mentioned that he doesn't speak about tshuva a lot here. He speaks much because tshuva is a classic mamata lamayla. So a person sinned or was in a dark place or they're returning. So tshuva by definition is something coming from the bottom up. So here he doesn't talk about tshuva. He talks about more how a neshama through its avodah and its contemplation on godliness, like mamala klam and sevav klam, and comes to want to be encompassed, first to reveal godliness, then to be encompassed in the divine, and then ultimately b'chol meidecha and Mesiras Nefesh all the way to b'chol meidecha. So here it seems like he's talking a lot more through an avodah, let's go, I don't want to use the word regular, but more of a malmayl lamata, not someone coming from the darkest to the light, but in a dark place, but not the darkest, how you reveal godliness. That's what it sounds like to me.
Okay.
And I pretty much confident that that's the case, because he's talking now Mamayl Lamata. He spent over almost 600 pages probably over Mamat Lamayla. So there's plenty of that discussed.
Yep.
But we'll get there.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we finished the paragraph on page 1416.